welcome to American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host, and today's title is Trump's Cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Before we start with the topic, I want to read a definition, and that is the word entitlement. A lot of people think that the social safety network of entitlement programs is some sort of welfare program, but it's not. Entitlement means having the right to something. And when it comes to Social Security and Medicare, if you worked and you received a paycheck, you would have noticed in the right-hand column of your pay stub all sorts of deductions, FICA and the like. Those were deductions for Social Security and Medicare throughout your working career. So to dispel some of the Republican notions that somehow an entitlement program means some sort of government bailout or handout, nothing can be further from the truth. Just to get that out of the way, because a lot of people think that's what Social Security is. Social Security, right now there's 71.6 million Americans receiving Social Security. That constitutes 34% of our national budget. Medicare, 14% of our national budget is due to Medicare, and Medicaid, which is basically public, that isn't a public assistance program for the low income. That's about 9% of our national debt. Add all three together, and you have about 55% of our national debt dedicated to these social network programs. As you know, Trump has created a notion of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and their task is to cut at least $2 trillion out of the national debt. By the way, our national debt's about $36 trillion. And if you were to take $1 trillion and divide it by every American in this country, each American, man, woman, and child, infant, doesn't matter, they would get $3,000 each for $1 trillion. So that puts things in perspective. Who's heading up the DOGE program? Elon Musk and Mr. Ramaswamy. What have they said about Social Security and Medicare? They said there's fraud and waste in there, and there's plenty of rooms to cut. What did Senator Mike Lee from Utah say about Social Security? He said it's a Ponzi scheme, that running out of new investors and government deep evidence is at its worst. Elon Musk said, as he posted Mike Lee's comments on his X network, he said, interesting thread. What did Trump say? Trump said there's a much you can do. There's a lot you can do in terms of cutting theft and bad management from entitlements. So these are just some of the comments. And I'll just mention that Trump did mention that on Meet the Press that he has no intention of cutting Social Security. We'll see. We're going to discuss that. And with me today is my esteemed guest, Ben Davis, my other esteemed guest, Chuck Crumpton, and my co-host, Jay Fidell. Jay, you just heard me run out some numbers. Social Security, Medicare, is a significant portion of our national debt. And the question is, how do you think the Trump administration is going to cut back $2 trillion out of our national debt and keep their hands off of Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid? How might those cuts, and I think there are coming some cuts to Social Security, how do you think that might take shape? What does that look like?
$2 trillion, if they want to cut that, they're going to wind up cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, because that 2.5, I think, is a total annual for all three. And this is a real problem because a lot of people who voted for Trump received those benefits. Furthermore, they paid into the system all their lives. I did. We all did, didn't we? And if there's a cut, they're cutting something that we really do have an entitlement for. People are going to be furious. So I asked myself the first question, and that is he serious? Is he serious to say that he's not going to cut when there's all this Republican GOP MAGA talk about cutting? And if he does cut, is he serious about that? How is the electorate going to respond? How are all those people, out there in the Midwest going to respond to losing a substantial part of their income that helps them eat and feed their families and all that? They're going to be furious, and they're going to wonder if they voted right. I can already tell them right now whether they voted right. the answer is this is a dead cat. He's getting our attention. He's throwing the dead cat on the table, and everybody's eyes are open wide to see what he will do now. Nobody knows what he will do now. You can't trust him when he says he won't cut it. But can you trust him when he says he will cut it? It would be political suicide for the GOP to do that. Now, the average Social Security payment in this country, average now, is $1,700. And he would take that away from people or cut it from people who really, really need it. And Elon Musk, whose name is going to be pariah soon enough, Elon Musk, who is now, as of today, worth $400 billion, he wants to cut the benefits of $1,700 for the people around the country. The irony of that is 400 billion feet tall. So these guys, multimillionaires, not only Musk and Ramaswamy, but the GOP senators who earn legislators who earn $180,000 a year are heading in that direction. They're talking it up. So it may happen. It won't happen in total, but there'll be cuts, and you will lose part of what you paid into the system, and you will not have the same money you had before to feed your family and enjoy, if that's possible, enjoy your elder years. This is going to be very disruptive, and it is going to cost the GOP and the MAGAs and Trump political capital that is very hard to estimate. But it is definitely on the table. That's what they keep saying. Is on the table. Everything is on the table. Cutting all three of these things is on the table, and you know what's going to happen. There'll be cuts. So I think this is suicidal politically, but I think we have to stand back and watch what he does with the dead cat.
In my write-up, Jay, I mentioned George Bush Jr., who traveled around the country basically not cutting anything. He thought there'd be some cost savings if you allowed Americans to take their own Social Security investment funds and enter into the stock market. Well, he did that for months, and it went over like a lead balloon. Apparently, Americans did like the traditional Social Security. They didn't want to have the options of investing in their own Social Security stock, their own stock market stocks. And you thought that the GOP would have learned something from that. And that is, as you say, they'll pay the price politically if they do change the Social Security program. I mean, look what happened to France. They increased the age by a couple of years that you were eligible to take their retirement benefits, and the French poured into the streets like there was like no tomorrow. It was pandemonium in the streets, and Macron learned a valuable lesson: don't mess with old people.
Well, the trick is to change the subject, to do it in a stack of proclamations he's already written, or bills he's already organized on January 20th. And at the same time, there'll be other distractions. He will have things on his desk that will distract us from that. Furthermore, he will find somebody to scapegoat. He will say it's all Biden's fault. It's all the fraudsters out there. It's mismanagement. It's all Biden's fault. And as a result, the people in the mid states who voted for Trump will get a ton of propaganda about how it was somebody else's fault, not Trump's fault, and he had to do it. And Elon Musk convinced him he had to make cuts in order to save the federal budget. Of course, they're going to do the tax reform thing, which will excuse the wealthy from tax, so there'll be less money anyway.
Correct.
And I heard one podcast to say that, this is the non-discretionary spending mostly that we're talking about. The discretionary spending is the other part. And if they knock this off, it's low-hanging fruit. And so, the military and all the other things that the government has to pay, including debt, which is 10% of the national budget right now, we'll have to go forward. So this is the low-hanging fruit. This is the way to go. And this is what they really have to do as a matter of their own perverse fiscal policy. Now, what I am concerned about actually is that here we have 6 weeks to go. And where are the Democrats? every day we hear about cutting Social Security. Do we hear every day from the Democrats? They should be pounding on this issue every moment of every day. I don't hear that sound.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Chuck, basically the same question to you is, do you believe Donald Trump that it's hands off Social Security and Medicare? Or how do you envision the Trump administration to pare back benefits or defer benefits or impact those younger workers that are still in the workforce paying and paying for the future of Social Security and Medicare?
Well, it's a great question, but one of the things that it points to is the completely oppositional counter logic of Trump and MAGA claiming, on the one hand, the waste is in the program, not in the payments, not the people who are getting Social Security are not wasting it. The program's being administered with waste. Okay, so undertake studies and work to reduce those waste. We know there's bureaucratic waste. If you could reduce waste in the Defense Department budget by 1%, you could probably fund all of that. It just doesn't make any sense. They can verbally identify, maybe accurately, where the waste is, but they're trying to penalize the people who are the recipients of the diminished result because of that waste. That makes no sense at all. And Jay is exactly right. Why the Democrats haven't attacked that? I mean, you don't need a college education to figure out that chop logic.
I want to just add one point, and that is this. Have any of you guys ever talked to Social Security? Have you ever gotten on the phone and dealt with them?
They were very helpful.
Yes, they're very helpful. They're very committed. They're following the mission that FDR set up for the social safety net in the late 30s. And so it's really remarkable that anyone would claim, they're involved in dishonesty and waste and fraud. They're sweet and they're committed and they care. They're that part of government you can be damn sure cares about you.
No, I think you're spot on, Jay, in that comment, because although I had a hold for an hour and a half before I got to speak to somebody, once I did, I was delighted. And I couldn't believe how much they helped me kind of figure out things, and which initially were very confusing. So thank you. Those are great comments.
I didn't have to wait at all, Tim. And that's why I'm thinking it's at least it's based in part on looks.
No doubt about that, Jay. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No debate
Inversely
there.
proportional.
Yes. Thank you, Jay.
That's the question, right? Have the media go out there and survey 1,000 people who receive Social Security benefits and find out their level of satisfaction with the service they're receiving. The likelihood you're going to find any complaints is very, very small, because the experience of all the people that Jay's mentioned and I've encountered, you encountered, has been very favorable. They're receptive, they're patient, they know what they're talking about, and they can help you make decisions and take actions that are going to protect and maximize your benefits from a program that's set up to benefit the population that established it by paying into it. That's not where the problem is.
Mm.
Problem is not cutting the payments out of it. It's cutting the cost of administering. Those are two different things.
Yeah.
Why
Well,
take the ingredients away from the cook if the meal is satisfactory, right? But if you've got waste in the kitchen expenses, he's got a team of 20 people in there, 5 of whom aren't doing anything at all. Okay, well, clean that up. And start with defense, not Social Security.
Good point, Chuck.
Also, these are necessary life benefits. These are health care. These are food. These are housing. People are not being accused of using Social Security to go out there and buy expensive jewelry, furnishings, whatever.
You paid into it. Yes, it is a social safety net program. And a lot of Americans, that is their sole source of income, which is hard to believe. But
Right.
be as it may, it's true for many Americans. I forget the percentages. I heard it's something crazy number that 40% of Americans right now today are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, I don't know if that's an accurate number or not, but it seems to me that if it is accurate, then a certain portion of that 40% are retirees that their only source of income is Social Security.
And the other guys who should have been fighting any cuts to Social Security because the beneficiaries, the payees, are the ones who support their businesses. It's retailers of life necessities. Gas, food, housing, clothing, healthcare, all that stuff. Those guys should be fighting any cut to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid tooth and nail, because that's a huge proportion of their income base, their revenue base.
Good point. Ben, all this talk about cuts to Social Security, Medicare, you always see ARP send out newsletters immediately. And, that's their mission. They're advocates for retirees. They're advocates for the preservation of Social Security, Medicare. All this talk about cuts, is it stressing out older Americans? Is it stressing out those Americans that are getting close to retirement? And they're starting to wonder how the Trump administration may or may not interfere with their plans to retire. Your thoughts?
I have really enjoyed this conversation because I want to put everything on the table with regards to discussing this. And since they're doing that in Congress, I'd like to put it on the table too. So, yes, if you're somebody close to retirement, you are worried. But I would also say if you're somebody who's about 10 years or 15 years from retirement, those are the folks who are particularly worried because they've been going along for 20, 25 years. They're thinking there's going to be this something they're going to get called Medicare and Social Security 10 or 15 years from now. And they are likely to be the ones the cuts will hit the biggest, because that way the ones who are close to retirement are not going to really be upset. And these folks are still working, so they can't sort of think of 10 years down the road. But that's the group of people that I think that really are greatly concerned. I get Social Security now. I'm fortunate that it's not a lot of what I get as a retirement because I have pensions. Okay. So that gets us to another thing, which is the 401k game that started back in the 90s. Remember that? You were going to invest in the stock market and you were going to make your own. Who needs those pensions? All that stuff. Remember that for everybody? Okay. And then how many people actually pulled that off at this point? Some did. I'm not saying they did. But I got to tell you, the idea of having pensions has come back. And Boeing, and part of their strike effort there was about getting back to pensions. Pensions, And then there's another part of this, which is there's the privatization of Medicare, maybe. Somehow trying to do that like through Medicare Advantage, and then that becomes all of Medicare, right? That and then somebody gets a pay stream through that, okay, or a profit stream through that. That's certainly something in the background. I just happened, as random as it is, Tim, to have read an article today which talked about why we don't have universal health care in the United States, and the reason is back in 1913. People were talking about having national health in the United States. And there was a guy who worked for, guess who? Prudential Insurance, who did all kinds of studies and statistics and stuff like that, played on race cards and all that stuff to get everybody to be against a national health insurance policy. Just think about it. 1913, we're talking over 100 years ago. There was a concerted effort to make us all think that national health was a bad thing and was going to help out the inferior people as opposed to the superior, that kind of stuff. Trust me, I just read that today. I was like amazed. It goes back that far. So I'm trying to put everything on the table because since Senator Lee says everything's on the table, let me say it this way. On that budget, the interest, the Medicare, the Medicaid, right, and what we call discretionary spending, I'm going to propose that we think of interest, Medicare, and Medicaid also is discretionary spending. Everything's discretionary, including the interest. Okay, the interest that is paid to people. We don't have to pay them the interest. We can default on our money. Yeah, sure, why not? If it's a question of defaulting on that as opposed to paying people to be able to eat, who cares? It's not going to hurt somebody who's worth $1 gazillion like Elon Musk, right? Here's another idea, which is that I understand from what Jay said that Elon Musk is worth $400 billion right now. Tell you what, we confiscate $399, we leave him $1 billion, and the other $399 we use to pay for our government. Then we take the next guy. Who's the next guy? Jeff Bezos. How much is he worth? $280 billion? Great. Give him $1 billion. Take back $279. We're over at $500 billion already. You just go down through the top 400 though. You go down your list at Forbes, and you can't confiscate. Sure, we can. National security. This is all national security. There we go.
Ben, I think they called that the French Revolution.
Maybe so, but what I'm trying to tell you is, like, if you really want to go there, you can go there. And the French actually have an old proverb, which is that for behind every great fortune, there's a great crime. So I don't know what the crime was. Okay, I don't know what the crime was. Okay, but I'm going to presume there's a crime because they've got a great fortune, right? But you see, just even hearing me talk about this, right? You see how your heads can kind of feel like, my God, could we do? That's not possible, right? Because we're trained to think interest is something that has to be paid all the time. And then we're trained to say that this, that, and the other. And in fact, we could really put everything on the table in a way like that. Now, on the Social Security front, please keep in mind that, the mass deportation of the illegal, quote unquote, undocumented folks, they have jobs, and in their jobs, guess what? They pay into Social Security, but they get no benefits, right? So that means that when they're gone, their money's gone in Social Security. Just think about that. Or whatever they pay in their taxes, all that stuff that's taken out, if their employers want to take out, that will be gone. So there'll be a bigger deficit in Social Security. Now, do I think that Trump is not going to touch Social Security? I would say, of course he's going to touch it. The logical thing would be to just extend that you had to work to 75 or something to be able to get Social Security. If you're somebody who's close to 65, say 62 or something, you're going to get it. But if you're somebody who's in that 50 group, well, you can get it, sure, but it's 75, as opposed to 65 or something like that. You can see how that would work.
Mm-hmm.
I also finally wanted to say that there is the cap, the famous cap, the $168,000 cap on Social Security taxes, right? I read today that Elon Musk works 14 seconds in a year to get to that cap. So get rid of the cap. Go right up the chain. Everybody has to pay the same kind of Social Security taxes all the way up the chain. If you want to put stuff on the table, I'll put that on the table too. I won't take away all your money, but I will get rid of the cap on it. Okay?
All right.
You tell me what you want to do. Obviously, this is not Trumpian thinking, right? But if you want to really kind of open your mind, right? That's what I'm trying to encourage, to the idea that the game is not just the old standard game we always hear, right? The game could be bigger. That's all I'm saying.
I'm certain the billionaires of this country are wiping their brow right now. It's wiping the sweat off their brow, thinking that maybe you'll just adjust your way of looking at things a little bit, which is nice. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. Hey, Jay, Ben does, he does bring up, some non-traditional ways of paying for it and some traditional ways. Let's look at the more traditional ways. And that one that's been going on for 20 years and actually has been used is an increase in payroll tax to further fund Social Security. Also, discussions about increasing the age, like what France did, before you can claim your retirement benefits. Do you see any of these as viable alternatives to the fact that Social Security is going to run out by 2035?
There's no reason it has to run out. And I agree with you. We should, increase the contribution. It's really important. And I don't think people would, be troubled by that. And so you add 5 or 10%, and maybe to some extent you solve the problem. On the other hand, let me throw some things on the table. Number one is you can't stop paying the national debt. If you do that, the American dollar will no longer be the reserve currency. We will no longer have any influence in the world. Somebody else will step up and take advantage, whether it be China, Russia, who knows. So that'd be very dangerous not to pay the national debt. We lose national credibility immediately. We can't do that. We all have federal bonds, don't we, Ben?
Right. America first. Okay.
The other thing is, going out in the street and protesting. This is not a good idea in the Trump administration because you'll be met with the army under the Insurrection Act. So I wouldn't count on that one. There's a lot of people in a vegetation state around the country, and Medicaid is paying for that. This is a big problem because you don't know how much it's going to cost. And there's a religious factor there because they go to the family. This person is non-compass. They go to the family and they say, is it okay with you that we pull out the tubes? And the family says, no, God wants the tubes to stay in. And so, there's a Christian national issue there. And they will all want the tubes to stay in. And that costs an unbudgeted amount of money, which we really shouldn't be spending. But I go to Ben's point, really important point, is we ought to have socialized medicine. Ben, you spent time in France. I'm sure there was decent medicine there, all over Europe and Canada. And of course, UK, has been doing socialized medicine for a long time. So I don't understand why we don't get to that. That would solve the problem. It would solve the problem on all ends of the spectrum for everyone and for the medical community as well. So what we have now, I'll admit, is broken. What we have now is a situation where doctors are being drained all over the country. They're not going to medical school. They don't care. They don't want to practice, all that. And the result is they leave the practice and we have to wait weeks and weeks before we can get an appointment. And then you have the United Healthcare kind of problem. It's broken, man. If they really wanted to do something, I'd do something. Now, he was asked in that interview a couple of days ago, what he thought about
Affordable Care Act and all that stuff.
the Affordable Care Act, and he said, "Oh yeah," he said the same thing in the debate. "Oh yeah, it's a bad idea, terrible, doesn't work, terrible, terrible." Just insulting it without any detail. And she asked him, the interviewer in this interview. Asked him, what's your plan? He says, we got concepts.
Yeah.
Holy moly, haven't we been through that? And at this time he said we have multiple concepts. That doesn't make it better. I would rather have the fewer concepts that he can actually execute. But he is no further along, even under the pressure of that interview. We don't have a solution. The GOP is never going to find one. Obamacare serves tens of millions of people. If you pull it, they're going to be on the street, which takes me to my next point, which I think we have to consider. And it's your kind of point, Tim. It's the media. It's the information and the misinformation and the disinformation. We have an administration coming in that isn't going to tell us the truth. So let's assume these people, elderly people, sick people, people with pre-existing, medical issues, these people are going to be starving. They're going to be dying. They're going to be dying on the streets, starving. And all through those very states that voted for him, okay? And who is going to tell us what the numbers are? Is it going to be the health department? No, it's not. And the media will be foreclosed. They won't tell the media. The media will not be able to get that information. We won't know the suffering that these people have in both in medical issues and in starvation and the destruction of the social fabric and the family around the country. With all these unwanted children that were not, where the mother could not have an abortion. I mean, it will turn the whole thing upside down. But what troubles me most is we here are concerned about these issues. We will not know the effects of all these cockamamie policies. We will not know how people are suffering. The media won't be able to find out. Government won't tell them.
Could I just jump in on
Yes,
that?
go ahead.
we're living that right now. For example, in Texas, they just decided to not look at the numbers for the first 2 years after Dobbs for women's mortality. For pregnant women's mortality, they just said we're not going to. We're just going to ignore the last 2 years. I mean, it's apparently gone up dramatically in Texas, but they're just not going to collect the numbers anymore. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the kind of thing that you can expect, is just basically hiding the numbers.
We saw this during the AIDS epidemic. Our government wasn't forthright on calculating and telling the American public just how many people were dying of AIDS.
It's a good point, because there's a fair chance we're going to have another pandemic in the time of the coming Trump administration, and we do not have competent people running the health agencies here, and in his administration. Yeah, we won't know what's going on. We won't be able to get vaccines. We won't know what's going on, and that's on the pandemic side. What about the inoculations of childhood diseases? These things run viral also. And they catch them in school. They catch them, wherever they engage with other people and families. And if the health department doesn't want to tell us about it, if they're dying of these diseases, if we have epidemics around the country for diseases that were cured, 100 years ago, okay, what happens? We won't even know.
Good point. Thank you. Chuck, we're almost out of time, but I want to get this question out to you, and that is, if you recall the Trump campaign, he really attracted a lot of attention, particularly from service workers, saying that he wasn't going to tax tips, he wasn't going to tax overtime, and if you really think about it, that's a lot of money not to be taxed. So yet again, in fact, that would equate to about $900 billion that could fund Social Security. Do you think Donald Trump's tax waivers or tax holidays are going to go through? And if so, if they do go through, what impact may they have on social entitlement programs?
Well, I think you got to look at the other side of that coin, which is who in the labor force are at greatest risk. And it sounds like that would be federal civil service employees. And those are in the millions and millions. Okay. He's not talking about taking away overtime or tips. He's talking about taking away their jobs, their livelihoods.
Good point.
Which may have been for decades, without cause, except simply to reduce the numbers. If you look from a purely practical perspective, for example, at Social Security, okay, how much does it pay out in a year? How much does it cost to administer in a year? You add those two, you divide that total into the payouts. What's the return on investment? I guarantee you, it's one of the best returns on investment of any government department anywhere. Compare that to defense, compare it to housing, compare it to education, compare it to healthcare, any of those. Why fix the one that's not broken in a way that harms the beneficiaries who paid into it and established it, rather than the elements of waste that exist at much, much higher levels in other departments and divisions?
I think you're the concept that they're going to go in with a meat cleaver to a lot of federal agencies and get rid of career service employees is well taken. There's going to be a huge loss, and certainly not justified. Thank you.
The policies from a purely business standpoint, if you ask people who actually run organizations that make Musk and the rest of them so much money, they would never adopt policies like that in their own organizations. Reduce the payment of benefits to the shareholders because there's waste within their department. Find me a business person, a responsible business person, who's going to say that's a priority or an effective way to approach waste.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Chuck. Ben, last question before we wrap up. Mm-hmm. There's remember the tariffs that Donald Trump wants to do? Remember what all the top economic advisors say that's going to do, and that's inflation. Remember what Social Security has to do each and every year to adjust recipients' payments, and that is adjust for cost of living expenses, i.e. inflation. It's estimated that $400 billion will be added to the bill of Social Security over a 10-year period should those tariffs go in place. What do we say to that? What do we say to tariffs and the impact it's going to have on the social safety security net?
We should maybe start with the gross domestic product vision, right? There's percentages of growth of the gross domestic product that are going to be lost because of the tariffs, because of the mass deportations related to the tax stuff too. That will mean that there will be people who will lose jobs, people will lose things. There'll be dislocations and all that. I mean, the package of his economic package, from what I can see, and I saw a presentation by a Harvard Business School guy who is a professor, really made it pretty clear to me that it's actually going to be drastically bad for the average American, what the results if he does everything he wants to do in terms of what the economy is going to be doing, in terms of the possibility of recession and all that. The sense I get is that I now understand why he had 6 bankruptcies, okay? Because his plan is really to kind of bankrupt the United States in a way and cause a lot of pain. So I just think it's a real there's a really negative risk there. The only other thing that I guess maybe I'm a little pessimistic or something. You know, there's been this horrible story about this guy, Mr. Mangione, who was alleged to have killed that healthcare CEO. Well, maybe it's predictable, but I was amazed that the response of CEOs and board of directors was what? It was to increase their security. It was not to reflect on all these stories that people have been putting out about the horrendous experiences they've had in getting their health care, right? It was just about, well, we got to increase our security, as opposed to maybe we should rethink how we're doing these things in terms of deny, defend, depose. By the way, deny, defend, and depose sounds like something that a management consultant like McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group put up on a PowerPoint on a board. I don't know if you remember the opioid crisis, but I found a link to a McKinsey apology for what it had been advising, what is the Sackler family with regards to the opioid price. So I was like, I read, those 3 words look like it's absolutely something off of a PowerPoint. You can just see how it would be in some presentation at the top of a CEO and all that. But the thing that makes me pessimistic is, to the extent that all they think of is about getting increases to their security, all these people we talk about who are dying, all these people who are getting sicker, all that, they don't care. That's the thing that maybe is a little chilling. They don't care. They really don't care about those people. And they will just let them die. And then they'll find somebody to blame. Right now, it's the immigrants. It'll be somebody else another time. It'll be whatever. But you just got to understand, they really don't care.
I think you're spot on. I think Americans, by and large, have a sense of rage about how their claims are handled or not handled. And I think the assassination of the CEO for United Healthcare has sparked something out of the American public and their sense of rage when it comes to how they're being treated by healthcare companies. It's interesting, and that's probably a topic for another show.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ben. Jay, why don't you wrap up with your final comment on this topic?
Well, with the tariffs, we're likely to have inflation. And that makes it all the worse for people who are relying on Social Security in their senior years or for whatever reason. So it's 2 hands coming in from different directions that'll make their lives miserable. And I think when Elon Musk said, "You guys are going to suffer for the first 2 years," and you say that, but after that it'll be better. Well, I think it's clear, under what they're talking about. In the first 2 years, the public will suffer. except the wealthy. The public will suffer. He never explained why at the end of the 2 years we'll stop suffering. And I suggest to you, he has no good reason to make that statement. We'll just continue suffering. The other point I want to make, and I think this is really important, is the American citizen now has 3 connections with federal government, 3 main connections. Since the 70s, we haven't had the draft. So it's a volunteer, military service, and there's not that many people who volunteer actually. And they're a small subset. So what are the 3 ways that we connect with federal government? Well, 1 is we pay taxes. 2 is we pay payroll deductions like FICA into the system. We don't like doing that. We don't like paying taxes, and we don't like doing that. And the 3rd is Social Security, the benefits that come out and save us. Those are the 3 ways that we engage with the federal government. That's pretty much all there is for most people. If you take away Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, you're making people very unhappy. Now, all of a sudden, there is nothing that's positive, not a thing that is positive in their engagement with federal government. And if these guys wanted to make the country hate federal government, they're doing a great job. And wait till the regulation stops and we don't have clean water, clean air, and clean food. Wait till that stops, and wait till there's a pandemic and childhood diseases. Wait till that happens. So, I suggest that over time, and it won't be long, people will hate the federal government. This leads to chaos and pandemonium. It leads to divisiveness. It leads to a breakdown of our whole society. And I don't know for sure whether that's what Trump and his friends want, but I think that's the effect.
Thank you, Jay. Chuck, your final thoughts.
We keep hearing that the ones that the investment in and the establishment of the services, whatever they may be, educational, housing, healthcare, Social Security, any of those things, the people who have earned the right to those, the entitlement concept that you started with, are the ones who are being punished by these proposed cuts, by the civil service cuts, of people unrelated to merit, simply moving employment by the federal government back to a purely political basis. That's never made any sense. And then Jay's point at the end. Who do you hurt and who do you benefit? At some point, that realization, that light bulb is going to have to, without the help of the media, unfortunately, is going to have to shine.
Jay talked about Elon Musk saying that we're going to have 2 years of hardship and then it's going to be great. This is usually called the hockey stick approach in top management, where the first 2 years of change are going to be tough, but then we're going to take off and our sales are going to be tremendous. The old hockey stick picture of the future, right? And it's a game, right? You know what I mean? It's just, he has no clue. He has no clue.
All right. I'd like to just wrap up by saying how I started, and that is the definition of entitlement is having a right to something. And remember, your Social Security, your Medicare, they're not government handout welfare programs. They're a right that you contributed to all your working life. And so if you find that cuts are coming your way, stand up, speak out. And with that, I'd like to thank my esteemed guest, Ben Davis, my other esteemed guest, Chuck Crumpton, and my co-host, Jay Fidell. I'm Tim Apicella, your host for American Issues Take One, and please join us next week. And until then, aloha.